Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and on today's episode, I am really excited. I'm installing the new EX bumper from American Expedition Vehicles. So this is brand new, not too many people have gotten it yet. I'm really happy to have my hands on one. And so come along today, I'll show you the whole install process, start to finish. Of course, before I get into that, I have to show you how I got to this point and undid all the work I've already done. So AEV's new bumpers for the JL Wrangler and the JT Gladiator. These things have been hotly anticipated on the market. I saw them at SEMA in 2019 and AEV have been working really hard to produce them ever since. And this is a really cutting edge bumper. It contains parts aluminium, parts a stamped boron steel, which makes it really, really lightweight, but also really strong. And so I've got the install guide here. This is 22 pages of instructions. AEV are always really comprehensive with their install instructions, and there's a lot of different components to this bumper, and I guess a lot of variations between the different models between the Gladiator and the Wrangler, but this bumper is designed to fit all of them. And I have the EX bumper, which they say means it's for expedition use, and that means it's a full width bumper. So it comes all the way out here and completely covers the tires, which for the type of overlanding I do is absolutely essential to make sure that I stay road legal wherever I choose to go in the world. Especially here in Australia, if you run a stubby bumper, you're gonna have lots of trouble with the police. That is not road legal. I don't want to deal with that, especially when I'm in other parts of the world. I don't want police pulling me over, asking for bribes, all that kind of stuff, because I'm running something that's illegal. The other huge feature of the bumper, of course, it has a big integrated hoop, which is going to be fantastic for kangaroo protection. It, of course, includes a winch mount, and the winch is mounted down really low below the radiator, so you're not blocking airflow. And it's also kind of hidden by the bumper, so I think a lot of people won't even know that I have a winch. And then there's one other trick up its sleeve as well. This bumper has an integrated steel skid plate, and it has provisions for an LED light bar down in the skid plate. And I've never run a light bar before. I don't like the idea of just having things bolted on that people are going to walk over and kind of grab and try and take off, or it just screams, you know, look at me. But in this particular case, I think having the light bar in behind the skid plate, I think it's a great idea. First of all, nobody can see it. They're not even going to know it's there, but for using it, it's also down really low, so you're not going to get any glare off the hood. It's completely hidden, it's out of the way. Those are the kinds of features that I really look for in my expedition vehicles. So this bumper has a lot of different features that make it probably the best on the market, and I think this thing is going to be a huge success. We'll see these on every second Gladiator pretty soon as AEV ramps up their production. So as you can see, I took off the factory bumper, I took off the winch plate that I had, I got the winch out of the way, I think it's gonna make the whole job easier. And so now it's time to dive right in and start preparing the front end of my Jeep to accept the AEV bumper. So the first thing I need to do is add the fog light wiring harness from the factory bumper. So I just pulled this off the factory bumper and I've laid it out here. And one of the things you'll notice is this plug for the fog lights. It's kind of tricky. It took me just 5 minutes then to figure it out again. The way that it goes together is you plug the black to the black, you slide the gray thing down, and then there's this clip on the top that you have to push in. So to do that backwards so you can see, this is what it would look like when you need to undo it. And this is not intuitive because it's kind of stuck to the side of the frame rail here and it's harder to see. So first thing you need to do is pull the little tab out on the top, that little yellow tab. Now the whole gray section slides up, which doesn't feel very easy to do, but it does slide up like that. So you can see how far up it's come. Now you can just pull the black from the black and it comes apart just like that. And the reason I got confused then is because I went to put it back together and the gray part had slid down like that. And with the gray part down, you just can't plug it in. It doesn't work at all. So you have to make sure the gray bit is up, push it together, and then slide the gray part down, which kind of snugs it all, and then hit your little locking tab, and that's it. And I've seen a lot of Jeep connectors over the years. That's the only one I've ever seen that works like that. Okay, next step, still on preparing the vehicle, is I need to remove these brackets off the bottom of the compatibility beams. And it's funny reading that. I don't know the names for any of this stuff, but I remember AEV use really specific terms. I guess these little vertical extensions here are called compatibility beams because I guess they make stuff compatible like winch mounts or different bumpers or whatever. But anyway, these two bolts here that are kind of on a diagonal, take those out and then this little bracket piece will come off the bottom. That's easy enough. I also need to remove, there's a bracket here on the back of the flange that's on the end of the frame rail. And so there's one on the inside here, one on the outside, and then on the other side too, exactly the same thing. So there's 4 of those, and AEV's instructions say that I discard all of this stuff. I'm not going to use any of it again. And up here, I'm just going to hang on to this M10 bolt and I'll use it for temporary installation of something later on, but then discard it. But certainly the brackets all go away, and so these compatibility beams and the frame rails are going to look a lot cleaner. Just a second here. All right, the next thing to install is the big AEV toe loop that kind of hangs off the bottom like this. And what you need to do is start figuring out what of the AEV hardware goes where. And I find the easiest thing to do is to lay it all out, because then you get a really good idea of how many of each item there are, and you can check the instructions list exactly what is what. And this one's not too hard because this is the only one that uses the massive 125mm bolt. It says to use a washer, put it through, and then one of these big spacers that space it out from the frame. And then basically it goes through the compatibility beam. And there's actually 2 bolt holes here that it could go in. It could go in the upper one or the lower one. And so I've just been playing around for a little bit to try and figure it out. And when I put it in the lower one, things don't line up very well. But when I put it in the upper one, like I just did, I check the instructions later on. I have to rotate this upwards once the skid plate's on and the bumper's on, and it's kind of one of the last things. But it rotates upwards, then this bolt hole lines up, and also a bolt can go right through here as well, and I use another spacer. So that confirms to me that I do want it in the upper hole here. So it might be because I've got a Rubicon, or it might be because this is an export model, but there's 2 sort of holes here on a diagonal. For me, I'm going to use the higher one, which is round, and the one below it is kind of a hex shape. So I have to do that and put that through there. But there's another trick to this whole piece, which makes it even harder. Obviously, I'm going to do this bolt up really tight later because this is one of the toe points on the vehicle. But I think what would happen is if you did it up too tight, you would just crush the compatibility beam. So what AEV have provided are these big spacers, these big solid steel things. I have to get those inside the compatibility beam on this bolt. So basically I have to thread the bolt through, get it through the first spacer, get it through the second spacer, then get it to come out the other side here, and then get a nut on it. And they recommend using one of those magnets on the end of a stick. I don't have such a thing. I did just find an old magnet lying around, and I'm going to try and magnet it to a piece of steel and then try this. So I don't know how long this is going to take, but basically that's my next job. I have to get those on that bolt. And so the first one isn't too bad. I've got it on there now, but the tricky part is the second one has to go in there really square. I can't feed it through on an angle like I just fed the first one through. There just isn't enough space in there. So I'll try with my homemade rusty magnet attachment, which just fell apart. I'll see if I can make this work. Of course, my magnet is sticking to everything else that I don't want it to stick to. Hang on. Push it in a bit. Push it till the thread's nearly running out about there. And then you've got to keep it real level. That's it. Otherwise the spacer on the inside isn't square. Thanks, Dad. Couldn't have done that without 2 pairs of hands. Ooh, that's it too, I think it will. Yep. Okay. All right, so with Dad's help, I just got it. And what I figured out was that trying to feed the bolt through with the weight of the toe loop on it is just too difficult to keep it all square and level and everything. But with Dad's help, we could do it sort of one at a time, but there's obviously no toe loop on the bolt right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna chase the bolt backwards with my old rusty, whatever you wanna call this thing. So through the two spaces, through all the holes. So now that thing is holding the spaces and I have the bolt. So I can prepare all of this. I can get my toe loop ready, put the washer on the bolt, put the bolt on, put the big heavy AEV spacer on that thing, because the spacer goes between the toe hook and the compatibility beam. Now I'm just gonna chase this rusty metal rod back through again, through the two spaces. I can see them through the hole here and then out through that hole. And that's it, I got it using this, using Dad's extra hands. I don't actually know if I could have gotten that without Dad's help. And it does say too, I can install a nut loosely, but evidently I think you need to take that off again to get the winch plate on. So I'll just do that finger tight for now. At least it can't fall apart. And I think that's the toe loops for now. That's that step complete. Okay, next step in the process is to install the winch plate. And this is an optional extra. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. And it comes in a separate box with its own separate hardware, which whenever I'm installing AEV stuff, I make certain that I don't mix up the hardware. So when I open this packet, I'm gonna keep it clearly away from the rest of the hardware to finish installing the bumper. And this is the winch plate and everything you need. And as usual with AEV gear, this is extremely well packaged, extremely well organized. And I think this should be pretty straightforward. Famous last words. But let's get on with installing the winch plate and then see what comes after that. So the first step of the instructions for the winch plate talks about installing riv nuts down here in these two diagonal holes. And this is where those closeout brackets were on the bottom of the compatibility beam. And again, maybe because I have a Rubicon, maybe because I have export, I don't know, mine already has threaded riv nuts in that spot, so I can skip that step. And so the winch plate, after looking carefully at the instructions, I'm 99% sure it goes in this orientation. All right, after playing around a bit more, I've figured out how this goes together. And reading ahead in the instructions, it said, if you're going to install the AEV skid plate, which I am, go and get the mounting brackets for it. So I went and got them out of its box, and they go on the bottom of the compatibility beam here. They're actually not dissimilar to the factory Jeep ones. They go on the bottom, and then the skid plate mounting bracket picks up those two diagonal ones that used riv nuts, and then that gives me my flat surface that the winch will sit on, and the toe hook bolt actually goes through it as well. So the winch plate's a bit higher than I originally thought when I just eyeballed it. And now when I sit it in here, you can kind of see how it all fits. I see my bolt holes here line up. This is all starting to make a lot of sense. So I just need to do the same thing on the other side, put that skid plate bracket on, do up the winch bracket, and I'm just doing everything up like a little bit tighter than finger tight right now, just to snug things, just so they sort of won't move around too much, but I certainly have adjustability if I need it. And so I'll get those just on nice and loose and then see what comes next. So all the bolts for the winch plate are now in place, and they're all just finger tight or a little bit tighter. So everything actually moves around quite a bit right now. There's a lot of adjustability, the winch plate to the brackets to the Jeep, because I need to make sure it's all in the right place before I snug everything down. And the way to do that, the instructions say, is to install the center stamping of the front bumper. So I'll grab it now and we'll get our first look. How does this bumper actually look? This is just the center stamping, this isn't all of it yet. So there we go, center stamping of the AEV front bumper in place. Looks really good. And I just want to try out a few things. Yeah, now that lines up really well, the toe hook. The winch plate looks like it lines up really well, just like it's supposed to. And so now the trick is I have to snug in a few bolts to make sure that this casting is really firmly in place. Then I actually bolt it to the winch plate. That'll mean the winch plate is in exactly the right place. And then I do up the winch plate bolts to spec. And they're all in the instructions. A couple of them are as strong as 90 foot-pounds. So there's no messing around. These are big, heavy bolts. But that'll ensure that everything is in exactly the right place. then I think I take this thing back off again to get the winch in and whatever else happens. But for now, snug this thing down as per instructions, get everything where it's supposed to be. All right, so you probably just saw I installed 2 bolts from underneath, which have bolted the center stamping onto the winch plate. And as I did them up, it was really satisfying. It pulled the winch plate down a bit at the front, it centered. I know that the winch plate is exactly where it's supposed to be now because it is perfect relative to this center stamping, which now means I can snug down all of the bolts that are related to the winch plate, and I know it's exactly where it needs to be. All right, so I just ran around and I tightened all of the winch plate mounting bolts to spec in the correct order. Most of them are 30 foot-pounds, one of them was 40, and then the big one that goes through the toe loops is actually 90 foot-pounds. So you really have to reef on that one. But that means the winch plate is now in exactly the right place, and I'm going to be able to take off this center stamping. And now at this point, there's something else I can install as well. And I mentioned earlier that the skid plate that comes with the AEV bumper, it has provision for a light bar. So what I have here from Lightforce, the same company that make my LED driving lights, I have a 20-inch LED light bar. And this should fit perfectly. It kind of hangs underneath the winch plate, and then the skid plate will protect it perfectly, and the skid plate has slots that should line up. And I have to say, AEV sell a bracket kit for this exact purpose to mount the light bar, but thanks to COVID and shipping delays and all of that, I don't actually have those brackets. So I've seen a photo of them. They are just kind of a little right angle bracket with a bit of a bend in them. So I'm actually going to make my own brackets to hang the LED light bar, and that's probably going to be a bit of messing around. But suffice to say, let's get this light bar mounted and then I can move forward with the installation. So here we are a day later, and Dad and I made up some brackets, and you can see the light bar is mounted there underneath the bumper, and that'll be protected by the skid plate. And I did a few test fits to make sure it actually fits. And so my advice, if you are going to mount a light bar under this bumper, just get the brackets from AEV. You're going to save yourself a bunch of time. We did cardboard aided design to make those brackets, and they worked pretty well, but it was a lot of back and forward. And so anyway, the light bar is there, and I thought I would save the most satisfying part on camera, which is taking off the protective plastic. That thing looks pretty shiny. And I've just been going through the light bar too. This is really great from Lightforce. First of all, it does actually come with its own stainless steel mounting brackets. And so these would be fantastic, you know, if you were going to mount it here on the bumper, or maybe on top of the hoop, or wherever else you want to put it on your roof rack. I think the brackets that it comes with would be fantastic. They're just not quite right to go up here under the AEV bumper. And the other thing it comes with too is a totally pre-made wiring harness. So this has everything you need. It has switches, it has relays, it has the waterproof Deutsch connector to plug directly into the light bar. So this is going to be plug and play, which should save me a bunch of time, because I'm going to have to get onto that in a minute before I fully install the bumper, just so that I can fully reach in there and have no trouble running all of these wires. And the other thing, I was reading the book about this light bar, is that it is fully waterproof. So obviously, being down this low, there's an extremely good chance it's going to wind up underwater a bunch of times, and it's totally rated for that. That is no problem at all. So again, Lightforce making super high quality products, and I think it's going to be great. It'll provide a bunch of extra light for me, but it's totally out of sight, totally not showing bling on the vehicle, which I think is a really great way to go. So now that that's done, I'm at the stage now, I'm going to take off this center casting again. Now that I know the winch plate is in exactly the right place and it's locked in, I'll bolt the winch down, I'll run the wiring for the light bar, and then I can move on and get this bumper fully installed. Okay, so I took the main front AEV weld mount back off. I've wired up the light bar, it's all totally finished and ready to go. Next step, install the winch. And you can see it's a really tight fit here. This is the Xeon 10S. And I would say it has like 5 millimeters, quarter of an inch clearance between the winch and the grille on the Gladiator. So this is one of the things about the AEV bumper, is it pushes everything way back against the grille. It's actually going to make the vehicle shorter than it was with the stock bumper. And the winch is also really low as well. You can see it's very much below the level of the grille and the radiator. So I need to bolt the winch into place, and I'll check out Warn's recommended torque settings for those main bolts. And while I'm here too, I'm going to try and run the wires for the winch. And this is actually tricky because my Jeep is right-hand drive. The battery is over on that side, but the Warn winch has the wires intentionally coming this way. So I need them to come this way and then immediately do an about face. And last time they were only just barely long enough. So it's going to take me a while here to wrangle all of these wires and get all that sorted, and then I'll move on. So I'm just torquing the bolts on the winch here to spec, and I really like how they're captured nuts up in the winch. And one thing you'll notice is I've dropped the light bar down out of the way, otherwise I can't get to these rear winch bolts. And so if I was doing this again, I would definitely install the brackets for the light bar, but I wouldn't actually put the light bar on those brackets until after I had secured in the winch. It'll just save yourself a few minutes of time, because now I basically just have to put the light bar back on again. You can see here I've now installed the main weld mount, this center section, over the frame rails. And there's 3 separate bolts here that hold it on. The AEV instructions are really good at which bolts and nuts to use. So the first step to the whole process is you install your factory fog lights into this center weld mount thing. And AEV provide brackets for this. Depending on which trim level you have, whether it's a Rubicon or an Overland or whatever, you may need to screw your fog lights to these brackets. Then these brackets go in the AEV bumper. And the instructions are really clear. I've got a Rubicon with LED fog lights, so I don't actually need these brackets. They just mount straight into the bumper as it is. And the instructions say to put tape over the lenses, because later on I'm going to slide the wings over and they may scratch them. So a bit of tape now, that'll look after those. Okay, now that I've got the hoop on, the next thing is called the center closeout, or the center stamping. And this is the final outer layer of the bumper. And so I've just prepared it with a couple of U-nuts that needed to be inserted in the right places. And this now goes over everything. And this is basically what traps on the plastic cover over the hoop. It covers up these brackets here that are sort of at the base of the hoop. It is sort of the final outer skin, or the final appearance of the bumper. And it has that really nice AEV textured paint look to it. So it definitely looks the part, there's no doubt about that. And I'm actually just putting these bolts in here temporarily just to hold it on so it doesn't fall off. There we go. So we start to get an idea of how it will look when it's actually complete. I've got to say, it looks awesome. All right, the next step after that is to install the end pieces on your bumper. And this is where it deviates a little bit if you've got the EX version, like I do, the full width, or the RX, which is kind of the stubby version. And the stubby still slides on in a similar fashion, but you know, it ends about here somewhere. And also too, they make these end pieces for ones like mine that don't have highline fenders. Here in Australia, the Rubicon doesn't come with the highline fenders. And of course, if you did, then this piece has a different shape and it still matches up with the line of the fender. So it still looks really good. I can definitely tell you getting the end pieces on is a 2-person job. It's not something you're going to be able to do on your own. You have to slide it on. It has to clear at the front. It has to clear some U-clips at the back. There's also the brackets on the back that hold it all on. And so it's sort of going in front of some things and behind some other things. So Dad and I were both jiggling it. And then once you do slide it on, take your time to get all the bolts really loosely in place. don't do anything up tight to start. Just do everything very loose. You have to really keep jiggling and wriggling to get everything to line up. And then eventually you'll get all the bolts tightened down, and then now it's solid and it's locked in place. And in fact, I still haven't even tightened the brackets at the back. I think that comes next as part of the skid plate installation. Okay, now I'm on the home stretch. I've almost got this thing fully installed. One of the last pieces is the skid plate. And of course this is optional, but you know, if you're gonna run a big steel bumper, you're gonna run a skid plate. And you can see the cutout here for the light bar. And so basically this just bolts up underneath. I've installed some U-nuts already in the places where the instructions said to. And once you've got this in place, you rotate up the tow hooks and the final bolts for the skid plate and for the tow hook, and everything ties together and gets really strong here on these corners that are essentially the front of the frame rails. So final steps, let's get the skid plate bolted on. So the skid plate is now bolted on, and I've rotated the toe loops and bolted those on both at the front, the bottom, and at the back. There's a couple of bolts, and there's bolts now holding on the end pieces as well from the back. So there's a lot of different bolts here and a lot of sort of coordination to get everything lined up right. But that's all done, and you can see it's looking great. I should mention too about lighting. So AEV's lights, they hang from some bolts here in the hoop. And if I was using AEV lights, I could have run the wiring inside the tube here. That was a step before you put this plastic piece on. But my Lightforce lights, they have these great Deutsch connectors. They don't actually fit through the holes in the AEV loop. So I can't do that. What I'm gonna do though is I have to make up my own bracket to mount my Lightforce lights here. So I'll do that in a minute. And then the wiring, I think I'm gonna be able to zip tie it back behind the hoop like that. So it'll still be mostly out of sight. It should still look really slick. That's one thing that I need to work on. As well as that too, I'm just waiting for the number plate bracket to arrive. Here in Australia, we have to have a license plate on the front of our vehicles, and AEV make a bracket to mount it sort of here somewhere. I need to see it before I figure out exactly what that's gonna be, and then I can bolt on the fair lead. And thankfully, these bolts are really easy to get at for the fair lead, so I'm not worried about that at all. So now it's just time for some finishing touches. AEV provide these plastic covers, I guess, that go here where the fog lights go. I think actually I've got the wrong one right now. And so I just need to take off the masking tape that I'd covered up the fog light with, and then this screws into place. So that's a real finishing touch that's gonna look great. It's the same sort of textured plastic as the hoop and as the snorkel. So it all starts to look really good together. And then AEV also provide these little foam cutouts. They call them step pads, and you can stick them here if you choose to, stick them on both sides. I guess if you're gonna stand on the bumper to get up to your roof rack or whatever, just kind of adds to the look, I suppose. I'll put them on because I think they look good. So there's that, and I'm getting really close to finished. So there we have it. That is the install of the AEV EX bumper complete. And so I just finished it off here. This is AEV's anodized fair lead, and I've got an ultra hook here from Factor 55. This is kind of like their latest and greatest hook. So you saw the whole bumper install. You saw I used only hand tools. There is absolutely no cutting, no drilling, anything like that. And really all you need is a good socket set, and it's all metric, all of the hardware on this bumper. So 15 mil up to 19 mil, you're gonna need sockets for all of those, and a couple of open-ended spanners as well, or crescent wrenches to get in on the back side of things. But that's it. There's the bumper install. Let me know what you think. I think it's easily the best looking bumper on the market. It's probably the most heavily featured bumper on the market between all the different features that it has. So if you've got any questions about the install, let me know down below in the comments. As always, if it's been helpful, subscribe to the channel. I have a couple more major modifications here to make to the Gladiator, and then finally I'll be ready to hit the road and start exploring all over the place in Australia. And if you'd like to get behind the scenes content, if you'd like to get GPS track logs of where I'm going, where I'm camping, all of that kind of stuff is available to my supporters over on Patreon. So there's a link in the description. You can head over to Patreon now and check out the kinds of perks that you get if you choose to support me over there. So until next time, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks again very much for watching. Stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.